Professor Fuller, I would assume from UWO, on the charging for police, fire, and rescue at special events held in the city of Oshkosh. So without further ado, or Mark, do you have anything to say before we start?
No, I think
Okay.
Dr. Fuller can start and it'll be good.
Yeah.
Floor is all yours.
All right, thank you. I printed off what I have is for reference, but I forgot that this printer does it backwards on me when I have slides, so the staple is on the wrong side and it'll flip backwards, but I'm not sure how useful it'll be to follow
We'll figure
along,
it
but
out.
yeah.
We'll go with that.
So, I'm here to talk about the economic impact of the EA.
No.
Joke from that.
Well played.
I got it.
Couldn't resist, yeah. No, so thank you for having me here. I do appreciate the time. I know you guys have a lot of things on your plate right now, so I appreciate giving me the time to kind of to talk about this particular issue. And just kind of for the flow, whatever questions you have, just fire away as I go along, so you don't have to wait to the end. I appreciate anything that you disagree with or questions you have, just fire away. Think of it kind of as a back and forth more than a presentation. So I don't know if you guys can see.
You get started.
Oh, okay. All right, excellent. So some of this you saw briefly last time I was here. So the main idea of what I kind of wanted to discuss is, in Oshkosh it's kind of termed the event city, which I think has some positives and negatives. So the obvious positives, so why we want to be called the event city, is you get some increased tourism and economic activity, which comes with some recognition and exposure. And I'll kind of go into a few of the details of what the positives are. The obvious negative is that this uses up valuable city resources when you have events. So I'll go into some of the details of that, but the obvious one that I'll talk most about today is the police, fire, and rescue services. So that's kind of the key trade-off, right? So we want to have these events that bring in economic activity and tourism to the area, but we want to make sure that we're paying for the strain that these events put on city resources. So what do we do? So I think I don't know what your perspective is as council members, but from my perspective, it seems relative to some things, maybe it's not the most important topic, but I think it's relatively high stakes to get these things right currently. So I think if you talk to council members at any city, they would say that highest concern is typically the budget. So budgets are strained pretty much in every city. So we don't want to, as I'll argue, we don't want to overcharge, we don't want to undercharge. We have to figure out the best way to get these charges correct. And hopefully I can provide some insight from an economics perspective into doing that. So my take is maybe slightly different than what a city planner's take would be on the issue, in the following sense. So from an economist's point of view, what we want to do is figure out, well, what's the right number of events to have in the city in a given year, and what's the right amount of resources that those events should be using. So that's slightly different than a city planner might say, well, how do we raise revenue for covering these events? I'm kind of massaging it a little bit more to say, we obviously have to raise the right amount of revenue to cover the cost of these events, but we want to get the right amount of services used and the right amount of events happening in a particular year. So that's my perspective as an economist is, I say here the price and the level as opposed to just the price. So how much do I charge you for a service, and how much of the service are you going to use? So just kind of briefly, I think, you know, a lot of these are fairly self-evident, but, you know, so why do we want to have events in the city? Obviously, you know, in addition to the tourism and the recognition that the city gets from having particular events, when visitors come to town, they spend money at local businesses, and that income that the local business owners and employees receive feeds itself back into their property values. So in terms of revenue impact, you don't want to completely dismiss the effect of income on property values. So there's a pretty strong literature in the reports that kind of goes along with this. I discussed some of that literature and exactly what the results are, but you know, there's a strong link between income and property value. So what's the benefit to the city of Oshkosh of having successful events? If those successful events increase the income of local business owners and employees, that funnels itself to some extent into the value of their properties, which the city, in terms of revenue, benefits from that increased tax revenue. So then, you know, the other one that is not quite the same as the property tax revenue is room tax revenue. So if an event fills the hotel rooms, the city benefits, you know, from those hotel rooms being filled. So you have the room tax revenue in addition to potential property tax revenue. So just making the point that, you know, in addition to the economic activity you might get from an event, you do have some positive budget implications from these events, which is why you want to have them in the first place. So if events were strictly negative in terms of the city budget, then you wouldn't want to have that many events. I'm arguing that they have some positives, and so we would like to have some events. Obviously, the flip side is the events use city resources, and that's costly for the city. So I gave a few examples. You know, you have road closures, you have additional congestion, which you know, imposes kind of an indirect tax on citizens. So I'm driving around, there's an event in town, all of a sudden it's harder to get from point A to point B. You've got noise, and you know, the last point there is not to be dismissed. If I have a bunch of people in town, more things are going to happen, right? So ambulances have more calls to attend to, police have more calls to respond to, and all of that implies an additional strain on the city resource. So those are the positives, those are the negatives. So my economist perspective is we've got two problems to solve, I think. One is, how many events do we want to have, given these positives and negatives? And then two, how many resources should these events be using? And you know, can we control that? And if so, how do we do that? So, and I think, you know, these are one kind of professory slide that I have in here with an actual kind of definition type of thing. So, you know, in public finance, what's the best way to charge an event for the services that it's using would fall under what we call user charges, which, you know, is simply I charge the person that uses a particular service. So water and sewer charges are an example of a user charge. So I own a house, I use water, I use the sewer, the city charges me based on how much I use those two resources. I use more water, I pay more for that. So these are a really great way to charge people for the resources they're using, assuming that we do it correctly. So I'll kind of go through, you know, what the few ideas in terms of how can we set user charges to, in my terminology, efficiently allocate city resources, meaning how do we use the right amount of city resources by setting these charges correctly. So, you know, I think, try to make this point as much as I can, is that the value of user charges is that we get the correct amount of use out of the resource according to its value. So when I charge you for water, I charge you a particular rate per the amount of water you use, or a rate of electricity. And me as the consumer, I can decide, okay, if that's the price of electricity, how much electricity do I want to use? And if I set the price correctly, we get people using electricity in the closest way to efficient as we possibly can. So if we get the prices right for these resources, we can get people to use them in the most appropriate way. The slippery slope part of user charges is that they can become easy to overuse. Meaning, you know, if I stick with my electricity example, I just continually increase the price of electricity. So it's not tied in any particular way to how much you use it. I just say every homeowner has to pay more and more for electricity. So in that sense, I'm going to tend to, you know, overuse services or overcharge for services, and I don't get the right amount of use of those services. And we'll see kind of here in a second how that works. So if I impose a charge on an event, how does that affect the event? So that's first question, how many events do we want to have? If we increase a charge on an event, we get less events. So it may not be total number of events, but we'll have either fewer people attending events, less spending in the area, or we'll have fewer activities going on at these events. So similar to any, you know, tax that we would impose on a good. So if I put a tax on tobacco, for example, what happens? The price of cigarettes goes up. So what happens then? Well, people are going to either buy fewer cigarettes or they're going to look to different alternatives. And the same thing would be true with an event, right? So if I charge an event more, we'll have fewer events. If I charge an event less, we'll have more events. So that's the sense in which getting the charges correct will kind of give us a sense of how much events are we going to have happening in our area.
Can I just ask a
Yes.
question?
Yes, fire away.
So we're in reference of police, fire, and rescue,
Yes.
which in my mind are highly unpredictable events.
Yes.
When you look at something like EAA, police and fire may say, we need to be prepared for a plane crash. There might be 2, there might be 3, it might be in the water. How do you gauge what is quote unquote correct when these events related to police, fire, and rescue are very unpredictable?
Yes.
I mean, you're giving
I'll
examples
come
of
to it, yes.
tobacco and water
Yes.
rates and
I will
electricity
come to
rates,
it. I
but
will come to it,
those
yes.
are predictable and obtainable measurements.
Yes.
When they're dealing with fires and, you know, intoxicated people at music events,
Yes.
they're so variable in their degree to what they need services for. I don't know how you gauge a correct amount.
Yes. So
Well, I was looking
get
forward a
there, yeah,
little
yeah.
bit, and there, I mean, there's
It's-
still,
It's in there. So I will address that specifically just in one.
Okay,
like-
I'll
like
be
2
patient.
minutes. 2
Okay.
minutes, okay. But
thank you.
that you have the key question, right? That is exactly the key question here is, you know, I can stand up here and say, okay, you know, we should have this and that. You know, ultimately the question is, if we're talking about police, fire, and rescue, how do we actually levy these charges in kind of an appropriate way? And I'll get there.
Okay.
But that is exactly the key question. So, you know, here's starting to get at that. You know, how do I charge for these things? So in my terminology, I always use the term marginal cost. What I mean by that is, you know, if I use one more of these things. So in your example, if I have a fire at an event and I send 2 fire trucks there, how much is it going to cost me to send the 2 fire trucks? That would be the marginal cost to us of using this particular resource. And we want to base the charge based on how much of that resource you're going to use or you could be expected to use.
So in an event like EA, you'd rather have them sitting at the station than at your event, correct? Because you don't want to pay for that. Because you're not using them at the time, right? So you want to be a reactionary scenario versus a proactive scenario?
Well, not
Because
necessarily.
we
not
only have so many
necessarily.
firefighters on duty at a time. You talk about bringing
Yes.
overtime. Well, if they're at your event, then they have to backfill at the fire station. Because they
Yes,
have
no,
minimum
right.
levels, staffing levels.
Yes,
So, you know, I worked 30 years in law enforcement, and almost all of it was proactive law enforcement. We react to what's going on.
yes.
So if you don't want them there, then you won't get much help when there is a disaster, because there ain't gonna be that many of them there.
Yes.
And they're gonna be responding from, they could be at an accident scene on the highway created by the traffic volume to the event. They could be at a disturbance call, and now you have a disturbance call there. So if you'd rather not have them there, we can park them in the garage, I suppose, and
No, and just,
wait till the event happens, and then you'll
Just-
cry
just
that,
so we're-
what took so long?
just so we're clear, I'm not advocating for anyone.
Well, you got in here of, you're determining, you know, how many
So what,
people-
so let me explain. So what I mean is not keep them at the station and then send them. So let's say that we say we need 2 fire trucks staying at a particular event. So we have Country USA. They talk to the fire department and they say, you know, historically, these are the problems we have. Fire department says, we're gonna recommend that you have 2 fire trucks there, 2 ambulances, or this many police. So then the question is, how much do I charge you for what's there?
dollar for dollar. It costs us money to pay those officers.
Yes,
Costs us money to
that's-
have that equipment there,
That's my point. Yes.
so you charge what it costs.
Yes, that is exactly my point. So what does it cost me to have a particular fire truck there? That's what I'm gonna charge you. So, you know, how do I determine those costs? So, you know, so yes, I wanna charge you what it costs to have that vehicle there. And I also wanna take into account how much you're gonna use that particular resource and levy the charges appropriately. So, you know, I
So
have
you're
an example.
You're arguing for marginal costs.
Yes, marginal costs.
So if,
Yes.
for example, I run a restaurant, I should only pay the marginal cost for a burger as opposed to the overhead and depreciation and those things?
You do pay the marginal,
No, I pay more than the
Marginal
marginal
cost.
cost. Otherwise, I'd be paying very little for that hamburger.
but the marginal cost includes everything else.
Sounds like what you're suggesting is the marginal cost is simply the cost, additional costs we incur as opposed to the costs that get spread over the entire organization.
Yes. Yes, you should price according to marginal cost.
Is there some rule, some law, something statutorily that says that? Or is that your opinion?
I know it's math. So if I ran a restaurant, and I was going to price my goods, I would price them so that margin revenue equals marginal cost.
So if you pay $3 for a pound of hamburger, you should charge $3 for the hamburger. Even though you
Unless
can
it's
make
a 1 pound
six,
hamburger.
you can get 6 hamburgers out of a pound of meat.
Right, so I want to charge my margin revenue equal marginal cost, which in the business example takes into account price, how many employees I have, all of this stuff. So-
Electricity, insurance.
Yes.
And profit.
And make some
Yes, to
profit.
maximize my profit.
I don't think
said
we
margin
charge,
We're
revenue
not
equal to margin
do we
trying
make
to
any money in
make a
our
profit.
charging our fire chief?
We
Franz? We don't. We have a deficit in our budget, correct?
We charge what our costs are.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yes. I'm not arguing you don't.
Go ahead.
So, in terms of, you know, how do I charge for different resources? I just had this simple example. I know it's not, I'll relate it to these particular charges. So, a neighbor comes to me and says, okay, I want to rent a chainsaw of yours to take with me for a weekend at my cabin. So I've got, you know, two parts to this. So one, okay, if I have 2 chainsaws and I only use one of mine at a time, then the neighbor's use is relatively low cost to me for that particular chainsaw. If I only have one chainsaw, then obviously the use of the chainsaw has high cost to me. So, you know, what's my point here is that, you know, when we set these charges, we want to make sure that events aren't overtaxing the most valuable resources that the city has. So if the city has, you know, a particular fire truck, as you said, that's used a lot and that the city really needs, well, then they should charge more for that particular fire truck. Why? Partly to discourage the events from using that particular resource. So we don't want to tie up valuable resources at the event unless it's absolutely necessary. If it's absolutely necessary, then you're going to pay a higher price for that. So two parts of this is, one, what's the sort of opportunity cost to me? Meaning, what else could I use this for? Is it high value or low value to me? The other consideration is, how much is my neighbor going to use the chainsaw? So if my neighbor says, I'm just going to cut down this small little tree over here and that's it, well, then the neighbor's not going to depreciate my chainsaw very much. If the neighbor says, I'm going to go into the forest, cut down 100 trees, the neighbor's going to depreciate my chainsaw quite a bit. I'm going to charge my neighbor a higher rate than if they didn't use it as much. So the two parts to this, I'm arguing, are, you know, basically, how valuable is the resource to me in terms of its other uses? Is this something that the city is using a lot and we don't really have the opportunity to send it someplace else? Then we want to charge a higher price, lower price if we don't use it that often. And how much is it going to get used? Right? So if a resource is out at an event and it's getting used and it's getting used and it's getting used, then the resource is depreciating, and you want to compensate for that depreciation.
But we don't know how much a fire truck or an ambulance will be used at an event.
Right,
Yeah,
I
so
don't, I
you
don't
may-
think
you may
any
have to do
special
it
events are
after.
coming up to Chief Franz and saying, hey, I'm planning on having one fire and 2 fights.
No,
and-"
right. So I would say in that case, you want to charge in two ways. So one is, you know, whatever fixed parts you're having there already, you know.
So staff.
You pay, right. So whatever's there, you're paying for that. And then after the event, depending on how much they were used, you may have to charge based on that as well. So if an event has no fires, my charge should be different than if I had 10 fires, is my point. Why? Because, well, you used my fire truck a whole bunch, and now the fire truck is wearing out. You have a better sense of me and how quickly these things depreciate, but they depreciate, right? So the more I use the truck, the faster it wears out, the more trucks we have to buy.
I have a question for Chief Franz. There have been occasions, we've had plane crashes at the event. We've also had planes go down in the lake, both of which require a lot of resources.
Correct.
Using the crash of the lake example, do we send a bill for all these services after the mishap?
No, not for that. You know, for example, when we had this past off-site property, other than the standby cost that we provide at the event itself, if an incident would occur off the grounds, we would consider that covered by our normal response. So whatever equipment, staff hours that it takes to respond to that would not be charged.
And I don't believe the county charges for their boat on the water, do they?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
So we're
'Cause they have a boat on the
we're
water.
providing services at no cost for some of these events. We can't predict a plane crash.
No,
Or
but it-
where
right.
it's gonna crash either.
Right.
Yeah, and our charges have never been based on for fire response, a point of service charge such as that, actual usage or time of the equipment is what he sees.
We're attempting to capture fixed cost, basically.
Yes, I mean, the vehicle has a set cost to us, when we purchase it and to maintain it throughout the year. Obviously, the more we use it, the more the maintenance cost of that particular piece of equipment comes up. If we were to charge, let's say for a fire apparatus, only its engaged hours of use, it would be a pretty phenomenally high cost. if we were to do that. Because regardless, it cost us a certain amount of money over a period of time. We keep our trucks around for, depending on what type of apparatus, anywhere between 10 and 20 years, plus that maintenance cost. If we only charge for the exact hours that it's in service, the hourly rate, and we could try to figure that out, it would probably be shocking the expense of what that would be.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm sort of saying do both, basically.
Proceed, we're,
Okay, excellent. So, so that's the two parts that I think are key to getting the right amount of resources used and the right resources used, is to think of the cost in this particular way. So, what's the value to us, and how much is it going to be used? Taking into account, I may not know the depreciation until after the event. All right, so the other part to this, in my example, is to kind of have a discussion with my neighbor, basically, in terms of what's the right amount of usage for this chainsaw. So I'm gonna set the price. The neighbor's gonna say, all right, well, this is how many chainsaws and how many days I'm willing to use it, and I'll say, that's a good idea, that's a bad idea, and then in the end we kind of come to some agreement. So, to get these things correct, we need to set the price in a way that's tied to our cost, and we need to have some option to choose level of service. Taking into account, like you said, we don't want to have nothing there and have people being reactionary, so you want to have a discussion between a particular event. So you go to Country USA, you say how many of this and that are you going to recommend, what's the price of this and that, and then I'm kind of deciding, well, what's the best way for me to allocate my usage of the city resources. And the city is doing this in a way that says, well, we're getting the right amount of our resources being utilized. So it's kind of the two parts there that I think are really important to get these things, correct.
one other question with an event like Country USA, if it's determined before the event, we need so many police and ambulances, and a riot breaks out, which requires far more officers and vehicles. How do we charge for that? How do we recover our costs? We send you an invoice?
Or match.
I could tell you.
No?
Gets awful
To
crazy.
some extent, I can answer that. In the contracts that we have with the special events for those services, we also have a disclaimer in there that states essentially based on the judgment of the incident commander, we can call additional resources to duty for coverage of an event. For an example, it could be the one that you had just made, or other examples is, I'll give one at EAA a few years ago that it was in the 90s and 100% humidity, and we had 45 EMS calls between noon and 5 p.m. in the evening, so we had to bring other resources to bear to be able to handle that. So it was more than what we normally planned for. So some of the events, as far as how we staff that, once we have some historical background, on that event, we can judge what would be considered the normal demand that we would have in an operational period, and we staff for that. There's two things, though. It's not all just demand that staffing is based on. It's also based on response time into some of those areas. So the volume may not necessarily speak to having that number of resources. For example, especially with EAA, with the airport rescue firefighting vehicles, that one would say, well, we have 4 of those out there, yet we maybe only have 1 or 2 incidents a day that last for beginning to end, let's say 55 minutes. It would look rather inefficient, but because of the area that we protect in the airport and the requirement from FAA that we have a 60-second response time, we have to have those trucks distributed in multiple positions. So it's not just a simple that's one thing that's different a little bit with public safety, is that demand is a factor, but response time is also a factor. And I should also say risk is a factor as well. That risk is there. Sometimes we get lucky and that risk doesn't generate any response at all, but that doesn't mean that it's still not there. And we have to have the adequate resources in place to handle that. And one of the things with aircraft, another thing that affects that is the size, the amount of fuel, the number of passengers that are carried on it, just to give you an example of that one particular type of event.
Okay, thanks.
So, yeah, I think those, you made the point perfectly. So, we say, okay, well, how much of this particular service do we need? Okay, well, what does the response time have to be in a particular situation? And what does the fire department say, this is what we need to have there to get this particular response time? And then I think your point is perfect. If I was gonna do it as an economist, how do I recover these extra costs is, okay, well, here's your contract, and here's what we agreed on is the baseline level of service that we need to meet all of the criteria. And then if you need extra resources during the event, this is the charge for those extra resources. So if Country USA has a riot, I have something in their contract that says for every additional squad car that we have to bring there to handle these adverse events, a riot being one of them, this is how much you have to pay for it, right? So then that also provides some incentive to make sure that events aren't underusing resources as well. So if Country USA needs, I don't know, 10 squad cars a day there to be safe, and they say, we want 4, I guess you can say, fine, but keep in mind, if more squad cars come, you're gonna pay more than what you would have had you not had in there originally.
So you believe the event should determine how much police, fire, and ambulance service they need?
Not entirely.
Because they're the professionals, right? Because the event promoter knows.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Oh,
That's not what I'm saying at all. I said specifically that they need to decide with the fire department.
well, they
What's the
usually
appropriate
do.
amount?
That's part of the cert,
And I'm not
right?
saying that they're not currently, I'm just saying.
Oh,
that's
okay. Okay, so they're currently doing it the way you are suggesting it should be done. Okay?
I believe so,
Mm-hmm.
yes. So, in my example, which it sounds like this is exactly to some extent what you're doing, we have a sense of, I have a fire truck, this is how much it costs me. How much does it cost me per day to operate this thing, based on how many times it's used? And, I want to levy the charge, based on that cost. So it doesn't have to be exactly the cost, but whatever seems appropriate based on its value to us. So what do we pay for it? How much do we use? How much was it used during the event? How much did it depreciate? What's the appropriate amount to charge for this? So, things that cities have had success with, is to some extent where they can, where it's possible to utilize off-duty officers and pay them, so I think your point at the beginning was perfect, that, if you have no one there and then you're pulling all of these resources to one spot, and then you have where they're supposed to be normally, then all the resources are strained beyond their capacity. So if I send off-duty officers, obviously paid, that makes sure that I'm not overtaxing their typical use on duty, right? So if I have a certain amount of police officers I need to keep the city safe on a given day, I want them out and about doing their usual job. And if I can send an off-duty officer to the event, that makes sure that everything is covered, right? The event is staying safe, but I'm not taking away from the resources I need to keep the city safe.
No, but you're paying time and a half for that off-duty officer.
Well, whatever the officer has to be paid, I think that's the, the appropriate kind of,
But then the off-duty officer is no longer off-duty, they're on duty.
well, I guess it depends on what their job there is. So, I always use this example, so my brother-in-law is actually a firefighter. So in Madison, and so, they, on his off days, he works at the racetrack when he's not working on a weekend. So they pay him to be there to respond to incidents at the racetrack. So that's a good way to do it. Why? Because if you took the on-duty fire officers, police officers, and they had to respond to incidents at the racetrack, then they're not there to respond to fires that happen in normal course. So I'm not an expert in the on-duty, off-duty realm. I just know that other cities have used this
Well,
successfully.
generally, that's what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's good.
yeah, our staff are used, that particular case, they may be working for a private contractor.
Sure,
I'm not
sure.
sure. But in our case, when they're working overtime, then we're also bound by Fair Labor Standards Act rules that we have
Yeah,
to pay
of
our
course,
people
of course.
overtime, that they're still working for this employer.
We got about 5 minutes.
Okay,
Professor
so
Fuller.
I will just, I'll kind of, wrap up. 2 points, which I kind of expect, we focus on the specific charges that we need to levy. And, my point is, from a city's planning perspective, you want to consider 2 things. One is, how many events do we want to have, and what type of events do we want to have? So if you get trapped in the mentality that adding another event is always beneficial, that will lead you down a wrong road. So you want to think about, what's kind of the cost-benefit analysis of a particular event. So if somebody says we want to add an event, well, we need to think about how many events we want to have. To the extent that, these charges help us determine how many events we have, that's a good way to make sure we get those, that level of utilization correct. Other than that, it's just a matter of trying to set the charges in a way that we make sure we use city resources appropriately.
Okay.
Don't overuse, we don't.
Mark, one question for you. By state statute, we cannot, quote, make these type of things a profit center. We have to recoup, we have to recover our costs, and that's it.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions from council?
All right,
Thank you.
thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. This is GovTV, opening accessibility and understanding of local government, helping you to be informed and involved. Also streaming live and on demand at oshkoshmedia.org and radio simulcast on Oshkosh FM 101.9. Like us on Facebook at our Oshkosh Media page. For a schedule of all GovTV programming, visit our website at oshkoshmedia.org. Please stay with us. Coverage will resume shortly. The Oshkosh Common Council is currently in a break.
November 14, 2017 meeting of the Oshkosh Common Council. Will the city clerk please take the roll call?
Rousey.
Here.
Peck. Palmieri.
Here.
Allison Osby.
Here?
Herman.
Here.
Pansky.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Present 6.
I would ask everyone to stand while Councilman Kraus does invocation, and followed by Cub Scout Troop 3698, who will do the presentation of colors, and after that, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance.
As we gather here tonight, we are grateful for the good things that have come to the city. May our decisions always be ones that are for the well-being of all whom we govern.
We will all do the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. I have a certificate for the Cub Scout Troop for doing the Pledge of Allegiance and the colors. Give it to the Scoutmaster. Thank you. Cindy, want you to do the group? Where you're from?
All right. We're with PAC 3698, which is with Lord's Academy. We are 5th grade boys. Normally have 6. We got a little decimated tonight by basketball practice, but these boys are preparing to move over to Boy Scouts, which is for 6th grade and older. So we are here to learn about government, and it was suggested we could come in and do the presentation of the colors to give the boys a chance to serve back to their community. Thank you.
Thank you. And would you two young ladies like to come forward? We have a certificate of appreciation for you. And who is Faith? And Faith, would you tell us, well, your name, where you go to school, your favorite subject, and Thanksgiving is a week away, what you plan to do on Thanksgiving?
My name is Faith Thor. I'm from Emily Cook Elementary School. I'm in 5th grade, and what I'm planning to do for Thanksgiving is spending time with my family.
Very nice. And here's your certificate.
My name is Sierra Pickard, and I come from Oaklawn Elementary School. My favorite subject in school is reading, and then this Thanksgiving we are going to visit my grandpa.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. You're more than welcome to leave if you'd like. I think the Cub Scouts have to stay.
They're making a run for it.
Surprise.
Thank you.
They can get their badge.
Oh,
The first item on the agenda is a presentation for the Image Oshkosh Plan. And who would like to introduce our speaker?
I think Darren Burridge will.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. John Houseel from Houseel Levine and Associates is here to present the Imagine Oshkosh Plan. As you know, it's a project that we've been working on for a little bit too long. It took us about 2 years to get here, but it's been worth the effort. We've come up with a plan for the downtown area. John's going to go over it a little bit. And really, this is not the end of a process. This is the starting of a new process, because now the hard work is going to start of us actually starting to present or starting to implement the plan. So after we get the plan adopted, the next steps is to form some type of implementation committee and start moving forward with implementation. So with that, before we even get there, though, we'll have John come up to and do his presentation.
Thanks, Darren. All right, it's good to be here again, Mr. Mayor and city council members. My name is John Houseel, and over the last year and a half, 2 years plus, I've been working with the city on Imagine Oshkosh. It's the downtown master plan for the center city area. And throughout, I think the city should be really proud of the level of outreach and engagement throughout. We've had a series of workshops and interviews, one-on-one interviews, focus group discussions, visioning workshops, workshops with the business owners, workshops with the residents, the plan commission, and the elected officials. So throughout, we've had a really nice campaign of outreach and engagement. And the result of all that hard work from the community over the last couple of years has been Imagine Oshkosh. And I'm just going to go through it really quickly to get it on the table. Feel free after I go through it to ask any questions you may have. Let's make sure I can. Okay, so first, it's divided into several different chapters. The first chapter is an introductory chapter. The second one highlights community outreach. As you can see on the screen, from all those different outreach activities that I mentioned previously, we looked at the interviews, the focus group, the visioning workshops, the interviews, and we really sort of boiled down to the issues that were of most importance categorically to people when focusing on the center city. And those are housing, economic development, cohesion among the entire downtown and all of its different parts, catalytic redevelopment in key locations. You've already begun to see some of that already. We've got mobility and access, appearance, and then character and identity of the downtown itself. So out of all the hundreds of people who are participating in the thousands of comments we received over the last year plus, these are the categories that were most important to people. The first thing that you have to do when you get started, when you do planning, planning is really three things. As complicated as people try to make it, planning is three things. It's understanding where you are right now, defining where it is you want to go, and putting in place what you have to do to get there. That's as simple as planning truly is in terms of compartmental three pieces. So the first thing we have to do is do a detailed inventory of the center city area. This just conveys how detailed the existing land use was, first floor and upper floors, every single building, every single parcel, to sort of capture that. In doing so, this is a very large geographic area for a downtown plan, for a center city plan. We superimposed Chicago's Magnificent Mile in here, and it fits from north to south. From the northern tip of this to the southern tip, so the North Main Street all the way down to sort of the southern tip at Oregon, that's about 2 miles from north to south. That's a big area. So you all got to agree that some of the areas that are on Oregon and North Main resemble one another in the core areas. Look at some of the waterfront properties where some of the institutions are, where some of the older industrial sites are, or where the arena is going. They don't have any characteristics in terms of built form or walkability that the Main Street areas do. So to have one homogenistic approach for the entire center city area wouldn't work. So we broke it down into 10 very distinct functional sub-areas. And for each one of these functional sub-areas, we defined key recommendations and characteristics on how best to approach improving those specific areas of the downtown, as opposed to trying to treat all of these different areas the same. So those downtown areas are the downtown core, downtown outer core, the blocks right around the traditional downtown core. That's the most historic development pattern. 2 to 3 story buildings, some a little bit taller, buildings right at the sidewalk, not a lot of open space, a lot of pedestrian, sort of your traditional downtown. You've got the downtown core, the area right around that. Northwest transition, Marion Road waterfront, South Shore West, South Shore Central, South Shore East, the Oregon Street area, and then the supporting neighborhoods. Those residential areas around the downtown. And even though not technically part of the sort of the center city area, so goes the downtown, so goes the surrounding residential neighborhoods, and vice versa. any truly thriving downtown has a thriving and bustling neighborhood surrounding the downtown. And if the downtown is lackluster, it often translates to a lackluster residential neighborhood surrounding the downtown. So one is as important to the other as the other is to each other. So it really is an important relationship. So we define these different areas and created recommendations for each one, design guidelines for each of the 10 areas, and characteristics in terms of land use and development for each one of those 10 areas. The other thing is we identified several different areas that we thought were the most likely candidates for redevelopment. In theory, any site can be redeveloped. It's a matter of a willing buyer, a willing seller, and a market that will facilitate some investment in redevelopment. But by analyzing the economics of sites, the geometry of sites, the current use of sites, you can say with some reasonableness over the next 10 years, these are the most likely candidates to be redeveloped. So we identified those sites as key opportunity sites. We identified them in the plan, and then the subsequent pages in the plan that you see up here on the right identifies all the different sites. We then have a development program for each one of those as what the uses ought to be and the development characteristics ought to be for some of those sites. Now, we identified with the advisory committee that we worked with 4 of those sites to do a little bit of development programming and visualization, the ones that we deemed to be the most catalytic in terms of if these sites began to happen, then other things would happen. So you can see the sites here and how we began to program, how many stories, how many residential units, if it's residential, how much commercial or office, if that's the case, how the sites are accessed from what streets, where landscaping or plazas need to go, and where parking is either at surface or in grade or below grade for each development. So we did this for 4 of the key sites within the downtown. Then the other thing we did is we identified catalytic opportunity sites, those large pieces like the Sawdust District and some of the other properties. And we did detailed visualizations as to what these could be like. The one for the Sawdust District is probably the most prominently well-known one because you see that poster in City Hall and you see it out and about. But the one that first envisioned the redevelopment of that entire area, and our envisioning for this area even included the basketball arena, the stadium, the parking to go with it, the mixed uses, and some of that has already begun to come online, which is really nice to see happen. But this plan provides the visualization for all of that. What you see up there right now is sort of a, in the plan, there's actually sort of a centerfold in the plan of that visualization for the Sawdust District. So it looks just like this in the document, and then there are other smaller ones as well. But it begins to show the potential. Sometimes you can drive by a vacant site or an underutilized building for 30 years and not be able to imagine it being something else. So we identified those sites and then reimagined what those could and should be, and some of that's already beginning to happen. The other thing that we did is we identified a key part of this was the idea of creating key critical mass in key areas of the city to attract employment and reinvestment. So we identified some of the key areas where we see that commercial reinvestment and priority concentration happening in the different areas. We identified all of those in the plan. One of the key things we did as part of this, because it's sort of an economic reinvestment strategy for the area, it's not just pretty pictures, we did a very detailed market analysis of commercial, office, retail, restaurant, residential, to find out where the gaps are in these types of uses, what the price points are or the markets are for this type of development. We compared it against your regional neighbors to see what is or is not being served for the region, not only for Oshkosh, and identified where that development could and should go based on market realities here in downtown Oshkosh. So one of the things that you see on the screen now is we identified residential growth. One of the things that we heard from the very beginning was the need to strategically prioritize increased residential densities in the downtown. As you have residential vibrancy come back to a downtown area, the business, the restaurants, the nightlife, other activities begin to happen. It's sort of a chicken and the egg thing. We had to have both online. So we knew that we had, not every street can be retail, with retail nature changing. We knew we had to inject some really select locations for a wide variety of residential product, both rental and owner occupied, both higher end and middle, and some below market rate components for senior and other things. So what you'll see on the chart right there on your left, you'll see residential growth area concentrations for key areas, and it's color coded by type of residential product. We think that should be specialized for each one of those key areas. We also examined parking, but you did a detailed parking study with Walker just a couple of years ago. So rather than reinvent that wheel, that's what Walker Parking does. We made sure that all of their recommendations were embedded here consistently with those recommendations from a year or two ago. We took a look at pedestrian mobility and transit, Unlike a lot of downtowns, this center city area is well served by transit. We documented all that. We identified all the different key components of pedestrian mobility and then identified where those gaps are in your existing network that need to be stitched together to provide a fluid network across all the different blocks. When you're looking at a downtown, there is a handful of things you have to have. And I don't care if you're talking a quaint, historic little downtown or a major metropolitan, contemporary, brand new downtown. It doesn't matter. You have to have a pedestrian-friendly environment. You have to have a mix of uses. You have to have some sort of residential density. You have to have easy access to retail, shops, entertainment. You have to have all of these in a fairly condensed area. If you're missing any one of these things, your downtown won't be as successful as it otherwise should be. So that's why you see pedestrian mobility, transit, residential use, and the concentration of mixed-use investment. We also looked at balancing the university's presence. We call this gowns and towns. There are positive sides to having a major university or educational institution in your community. There are also some challenges, a seasonal population. What do you do with tens of thousands of 20-year-olds? Sometimes two can be a handful when you got a whole bunch. How do you deal with it? The housing stock, the rental market is a lot more when you have a university present versus a community that does not have a university present. But they're also a great source of people, enthusiasm, energy into a downtown. They support a lot of the commerce, a lot of the entertainment. So we have a lot of text in here in terms of how to strategize segueing between the university's presence, their proximity to downtown, and really how to build off of that. The other thing that we really built on was sort of the arts and culture. You have a great history here of arts and culture in your downtown. So we made sure to pick up on that with establishing an arts culture curriculum and a coalition, attracting new uses which foster local culture, promoting public art. We state where to do that and how to do it, incorporating sort of several features that you have in your downtown into things going forward, and sort of bolstering year-round activities and events. You have some of the best events around. Your farmers market and other things are legendary. And how can you sort of extrapolate on that success to other seasonal events, festivals, things to get people to come to your downtown? Not from a physical platform, but sort of a community engagement platform. Some of the different things that we highlight here are different ways to bring in public art, both passively and actively, into your downtown. So we highlighted a lot of sort of national best practices and trends that we see that we think have true applicability here in downtown Oshkosh. We also want to make sure that all investment here was compatible, new development was attractive. So we put into place design guidelines, detailed design guidelines. In the beginning section where I said we broke out those 10 functional areas, for each one of those areas we say this is the character of this area, these are the design guidelines for this area, this is the preferred built form that in this area when you're walking or driving through it, these are the uses we want to see in this area. And those are area specific. This section of the plan talks about design guidelines. It talks about parapets, building materials, roofs, windows, doorways, signage, building orientation, parking lot screening. So regardless of where the development takes place, we wanted to establish a threshold of quality of design. So that way, if a development comes forward in the future, you can pick up this document and say, turn to the character area and say, is this an appropriate development for this character area? Does it have the uses we want, the built form we want, the character we want, the ambiance we want? You can turn to this section and say, are the building, materials, design, features, cornices, windows, doors, roofs, the way they should be for this location? So we wanted to make sure that this served as a tool for evaluating proposals that came forward in the future. And you can see here there's a couple different sections in the presentation just for the audience to see. This is an example of parking areas. This is an example of the page of building lighting, rear yards and rear facades. We give text characterizing the recommendations. We give bullet points setting the design guideline standard. And then we provide a library of photographs saying this is what we're talking about when we say this is how it should be. We do this for about 15 different categories of design aesthetic. The other thing we want to do is establishing a sense of scale. This is the diagram I was talking about. If you look on the right-hand page, the left map is the center city area and how big it is. To scale is the Chicago Magnificent Mile just to the right of it. So if you ever walked the Magnificent Mile and know the density in there, the uses in there, the retail in there, and just how much you can jam in there, and then you look at the size of the center city area map, you know that not every area in the city center can be treated like a retail storefront development. It's got to work in concert together to make sure the retail areas thrive, the residential areas thrive, the office employment areas thrive. It all can't be one type of downtown. So we put that scale in there to show you what that means. We also identify where the street wall is missing to make sure you're not missing that sense of enclosure as you navigate the downtown. So the other thing we did is we took a hard look at streetscape. This is the public realm. We look a lot at the private realm, the development side, but there's also that public realm, the area between building front to building front, the sidewalk, the curb, the street, hop the curb on the other side. And we identified and we set up 4 different types of hierarchy for all the streets in the center city area. And for each one of the 4 hierarchy levels for each of the streets, we identified a streetscape design approach for each one of the 4. So depending on the map that identifies the category of that street, we put into place the type of design hierarchy for that street in the future, so that funding becomes available. You can pick these off block by block or street by street when the opportunity presents itself. Not do it all at once, because that's not financially possible ever, to do it everything at once. But with this plan in mind and the design standards in mind, you can do this year by year when you get a chance, and at the end, when you're all done, it'll work, and it works together in a cohesive fashion. So these are some of the design best practices for the streetscape components. We give a lot of examples on how to do crosswalks, how to do public art, how to do the river walk, how to do things like that. We give narrative, very detailed descriptions, as also we give, again, visual menus as to how to get this done. And then the last section is implementation, and one of the things we were asked to do is to identify the top 5. The city's done that in the past, I think with tremendous success. The reason we wanted to identify the top 5 is because we get into a series of tables that include more than 160 detailed recommendations. And rather than be daunted by over 160 specific things to do, we didn't want to make it general. We said, here's the 5 things we think you ought to begin to zero in on. On the following pages is 160 things you need to do over time. So what we identified here is to activate the upper floors of existing mixed use. So before you even prioritize or look at new development, which you have to do, you've got an incredible building stock in your downtown area. You've got great bones and great architecture. And there's a severely underserved potential in the upper floors that aren't being tapped into now. So one priority is to begin to activate those upper floors, which right now are not being activated anywhere near to the level they should be. To attract new business areas and employers to the center city area. I gave this example to the Planning Commission and to the Advisory Committee. The Advisory Committee, I'll just say, was fantastic, and they worked with us throughout this. But if you have, on average, a person spend about $125 to $127 a week if they have an office job in a downtown. Grabbing something to eat for lunch, grabbing a beer after work, a few times a year grabbing a gift or a card for someone back at home, dropping off some dry cleaning, running a few errands. But on average, in a downtown area, an office job position would generate about $125 to $127 a week for that job over the course of the year spent in that area where the office building is. If you can bring in 200 new jobs, that's about $1.8 million in spending in your downtown. So in downtowns, you often look at residences and you often look at retail and restaurants, but you don't look at the plus side of having office jobs downtown. And it's tremendously important. So one of the key things is to attract new businesses and employers to downtown. Encourage new residential development in the center city area. We identify specifically where and what type in the plan. Apply the design and development guidelines. We've given you design and development guidelines. The trick now is to apply them over time. And then to activate and improve their waterfront as much as possible. Most downtowns don't have waterfronts. You do. And the key is to leverage that to the extent possible in this plan going forward. And we have a chapter dedicated to doing just that. So these are the top 5 that we think you need to focus on. But if those 5 aren't enough, over the following pages, we have tables like this. And there are, like I said, 160 or 170 plus recommendations. For each recommendation, we say what level priority it is, how the best way the city can begin to pay for it, what the city's role is in accomplishing that, and who they need to partner with to get it done, because the city can't do everything. It simply cannot. So these tables identify who, when, how, the priority, and who you got to partner with to get that done. And that's how we wrap up the document. We try to keep it values-driven, but actionable, detailed recommendations. So it's not just a pretty plan. It's a pretty plan that tells you what to do and how to get it done. So again, that's a very, that's a 10-minute overview of a 1.5 year long process. There's a lot of detail in here. It should serve as a very effective guide for decision-making in your center city area. And again, I'll just talk again about the advisory committee was comprised of residents, organizational representatives, several downtown businesses, and that group, along with Darren and staff, tore through every sentence, every chapter, every paragraph, every page, and this has gone through back and forth and back and forth. And the draft you see before you is that level of refinement and revision and back and forth with staff and the advisory committee and ultimately the plan commission to get to here this evening. So a lot of work has been put in by a lot of people on behalf of the city at the city's level, and they've done just a fantastic job, and they've been great to work with. So that's just a quick overview. It's a lot of detail. I can answer any questions you want, but I just want to sort of introduce it and get it on the record. So.
Councilperson Palmieri.
Yes, so I have several questions. Number one was, in the stakeholder groups and some of the surveys that were done, did you by chance reach out to any of the businesses that had left the area, that had previously been here, as to, you know, what might have kept them here in the center city, or why they left?
No, we did not. We did not survey people, businesses that weren't here or may have been in the past but had since left. We did not.
Okay. And then I have a question regarding the potential partnerships on the implementation plan. Just having kind of scanned through that, it looks like we only have about a half dozen entities listed as potential partnerships. And, you know, that's a pretty heavy responsibility to put onto a few potential partners. And I was just curious whether or not that's still being fleshed out, or...
It certainly can be. We went back and forth several times with staff and the advisory committee to get it to where it is, made several changes. But if you look at who those are, you might say, you know, it might be the city or particular departments in the city, but it might be zoning changes, advisory, recruitment, and so that's sort of the city's purview. Sometimes it's local property owners and or local developers or investors. Well, that can, even though it's a couple of words in the table, that opens up to hundreds of potential different people that would fit that characteristic of a partner. So when I say we identified partners, we might say local property owners and or regional developers. We don't list all the developers. We just say this is a category of partner to have. And sometimes it's other organizations that exist here because they have networks and structures in place within the city to maybe do an aspect of this the city doesn't have the structure for. So we identified the key players. There may be other ones for sure. There could be laundry list, maybe much longer. But we identified what we thought to be those essential players or partners to get the ball rolling. But I wouldn't doubt that on a given task, they may bring in somebody else that we didn't anticipate, or somebody that does not even exist yet in terms of an identified partner. So we can make any modifications if you see a gap in who we might want to place in there. But we wanted to make sure we hit that top 6 to 10 that you've got to have at the table. And when those people get together to start talking about implementing, they may bring other players. But those are the essential ones we thought you had to have.
I guess my concern was that, you know, if we overtax, for example, Go H&I or Go ADC or, you know, some of those groups with, you know, these big chunks of things that may be a little overwhelming, but based on, yes, their
Right.
networks and them
Right.
deferring out, I understand that. And then one of the things that's talked about in the plan is inconsistent design and bringing things into harmony. And while I agree in part with that, I've also been to a number of communities where that harmony ends up with a product that's much like Disneyfication. And I wonder how we would mitigate that, because we don't really want to end up with that kind of.
I agree. You echo what I say all the time. I agree 100%. Our design guidelines, unlike some other ones, are not designed to dictate architecture. We're not trying to dictate design. We're trying to establish a threshold for quality and appropriateness. So we talk about building orientation. We talk about a range of appropriate materials. We talk about being sensitive to some of the historic buildings that might be around or in the context of a new development site. You can be more prescriptive. If this was just a Main Street and Oregon Street master plan, we could get very prescriptive and no one would have a problem with that. Buildings at the property line, 2 to 5 stories in height, traditional building materials, entrances facing the street, parking in the rear. You could get very prescriptive. Try to extrapolate that to some of the larger riverfront properties. You could not do it. So it's one of the reasons we broke it into 10 different functional areas and described each totally differently. And it's why we created the design guidelines in a separate section saying, when you're looking at the design of a building, you should take some of these things into consideration, but they're not dictates, because you may have a developer coming in on the waterfront for a huge old industrial site, and you may get a 60-foot wide building come down on Main Street, and you want to put a 60-foot building back up in its place to fill the gap. the same design standards won't fit both. So where you have, like, you see downtown say, everything should be Swiss Alpine type architecture, everything should be prairie architecture. I think they look contrived and horrible. So these are specifically meant not to dictate architecture and not to dictate design. It's meant to make sure design is high quality and appropriately scaled and oriented for the place and where it fits. So they're not that type of design guy. I couldn't agree more, yeah. So we made, there's enough guidance to provide structure for decision-making, but it's not so rigid as to not allow an architect to bring a great different design forward for you to consider, yeah.
And then I just had one other question, and that is, in the areas where we talk about the residential growth and that our central city is already one of the most densely populated in the region, and we're encouraging even more density. While I don't think any of us really want to advocate the sprawl on the outskirts of the city, that over-densification in an already extremely dense area, how do you sense that being, rather than going vertical?
Sure.
I mean, I think we should in some places,
Right.
but.
Yeah, in some places you don't go vertical because of character, not because of the ability or the capacity to sustain a higher density on a site or on a location. The key thing is there will be an equilibrium that'll find itself, and market will be the driver of that equilibrium. And what I mean by that is, if a large residential development comes out of the ground, that's going to take up some of the oxygen in the room with regard to the market absorption for that product point for several years. So what we identify is where residential is appropriate, where the different types of residential should go and how it could be characterized, and see development happen in a compatible way. But no one would anticipate that all this would come on board at once. And if somebody gets out of the gate first and does a certain type, maybe the other guy says, well, I was going to do that, but that's already in the marketplace. There's still a need for X, Y, and Z. I will do that over here. So an equilibrium will find itself in a downtown. But a downtown is the one place, because of the pedestrian atmosphere and the roads in and out, where people who choose to live in a downtown anticipate a higher density. They anticipate a higher activity. It's what they're looking for. If they want a lower density, sort of a more residential product, that exists elsewhere in Oshkosh and the region. So there is an equilibrium that will find itself through the market and the limitation of sites and who sort of gets to the different locations first. But in general, you sort of plan for what you want where, and the market will sort of figure out. It's not going to all come online at once. There just isn't the market for that.
So specifically, can you bring back the slide that has site H and J on it?
Sure.
Where there were some renderings?
Yeah.
Because as I looked at those, and I realize those aren't necessarily overly prescriptive either, but it's a little concerning because they remind me of Superblock.
Right.
And like the disconnect, let's say if we're talking about pedestrian and walkability, that you would not necessarily be able to walk through. You would be walking around an entire block and a half to access another side. And I guess maybe again, this is just purely conceptual, but.
Well, these are actual existing sites. So these aren't super blocks. These aren't really that big a site. I suppose if you look at H, it fronts both Division and Jackson to the back. But what we tried to make sure is that pedestrian environment was stitched together back in development. So if you were walking on Division Street, and that was a pretty busy street, you would see mixed use building at the sidewalk line, maybe residential above. Those could be restaurant or retail on the ground floor. So your sense of enclosure would be maintained. There wouldn't be gaps. If you were going on Jackson on the other side, that's sort of a residential product. It's a different feel. It's a block away. And the cars might traverse in between where the parking area is, but we tried to make sure if you were walking on the street, you weren't going past big voids. And there was continuity between what was to the north of you and the south of you in terms of stitching together that character of the area. So, and the site J is a site. There's no way to cut a street through there. That's not a super block. That's an existing site. And there's no room to cut through a right of way.
And I'm sorry, I used the wrong terminology.
That's okay.
I was thinking Soviet block, not super block. Just the design concept here.
Oh,
like
okay.
Very, very institutional.
Well, this is a volumetric study. We didn't do, like, if you look at what we did for Sawdust District, that was hyper detailed and expensive to do. And we wanted to show how many units you could get in there, the square footage. We wanted to show how parking could be oriented. The purpose of these is to demonstrate to the development community that based on market realities and based on available properties, the reality of something that could go here. It even says in here, these are not recommended site plans. We're not saying that this is what has to go here. We're saying this is meant to be an illustrative exercise and say, listen, based on market realities, based on zoning, based on how you want things to fit in terms of orientation, these are viable use concepts here. So we wouldn't expect you to see these exact buildings here. We're trying to demonstrate to the development community that residential building will work.
And if that's extremely dense, for example, on site J, would it be anticipated that that's like some type of transit-oriented design since there is so little parking there? I mean, it looks like
No,
it says at-grade enclosed parking, or would that be underneath on the first level?
At-grade enclosed means there's a garage door that as you pull up, it goes up and you park inside the building. And the geometry and the footprint of that building was designed to provide the parking module width. The parking module width is about 60 feet. 18 feet of parking, 24-foot driving out, 18 feet of parking. That's like any grocery store and anything. That 60-foot module is about right. These building footprints are designed with those were garage door entrances going into the ground floor.
Gotcha.
You could park the units up above there at least two parking spaces per unit. So we don't want to show the development community, hey, this is a cool picture. We want to say this would actually work. It doesn't have to be this, but there's not pretty pictures. These have market viability and site plan viability. So all these actually work from the inside out. And even if you look at H and the residential, that accounts for the hallway, the units coming off of both sides, the ventilation in the windows. So we know that footprint and that geometry would work for a residential product. And it could be either stratificated vertically or horizontally, depending on if you wanted a traditional townhome with 2 or 3 levels, or if you wanted a condominium or apartment stratified horizontally within the structure. But the floor plan size of that depth-wise would accommodate a variety of residential product. So this is meant to demonstrate development viability on sites where development currently like this doesn't exist.
Is there concern with site J and that the perception of public access to the waterfront would be diminished? I mean, obviously, there's still the riverfront trail there, but, you know, currently, while that is a vacant lot, I just wonder sometimes if, you know, you're looking at like stepped down as opposed to this like superimposing, you know, block of wall, that perception could be that the public does not really have full access to the waterfront.
Yeah, and it could be. We made sure that throughout the entire plan, there is a really healthy public area, not just a little trail all along the waterfront. So it's very, very open. What you lose here, I think, when you sort of see something like this, is sense of scale. So we have the huge plaza in the back. We have a public river walk along the water. It's really wide open. What you're sort of missing here is Jackson begins to go up over the river. So there's a pretty severe grade change here that's going to maintain those views as you drive up there. So more people are driving up there, so the view sheds are actually quite nice. And if you look to what would be the west of this building, or off to the right a bit, there's a huge gap between the edge of this building and the start of the next building that's already coming out of the ground. So the vistas in between those buildings are several hundred feet to the water.
Gotcha.
So we made sure that those vistas, and it's a good question. If you have waterfront, lakefront, oceanfront, riverfront, what you want to make sure of is that the first guy there doesn't wall off the amenity. So you're exactly right. So we made sure when we designed this one, and like when we did the Sawdust, that you may have development in or near it, but you should be near that and be able to see these huge vistas of open space and water, even if they had a portion of that. Like I always say, you can screen the Eiffel Tower with your thumb if you stand in the right place, all right? But you can still see the entire panoramic of the rest of the city. So from most perspectives here, unless you were parked right on Marion right in front of this, but as you approach it, as you zip past it, as you look back to it, the water views are expansive. But when you're right up against it, like I can't see you right now, but I can see the rest of the council. So it's sort of the same premise here, but we made sure that those vistas were as prominent as we could make it. But what this again shows is just it's an illustrative example. If a developer came in, you're asking all the right questions. Hey, Mr. Developer, what's the view like coming over the bridge this way? Can I still see the river? And they would have to demonstrate that to you. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. Are there any other questions from council?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Darren and staff. We now have 2 public hearings, and I will have to read each of these 3 times. There will be no vote taken on them this evening. They will be voted on the 11th or the 28th of this month. The first is the 2018 city budget. Second reading, 2018 city budget. Third and final reading, 2018 city budget. Pam, did anyone register to speak to this item?
I have no one.
Next is ordinance 17-536, approve amendment to comprehensive land use maps, changing the land use designation for properties located on the south side of State Highway 91 between Clairville Road and State Highway 44 from industrial to residential. Plan Commission recommends approval. Second reading, ordinance 17-536, approve amendment to comprehensive land use maps, changing the land use designation for properties located on the south side of State Highway 91 between Clairville Road and State Highway 44 from industrial to residential. Plan Commission recommends approval. Third and final reading, ordinance 17-536, approve amendment to comprehensive land use maps, changing the land use designation for properties located on the south side of State Highway 91 between Clairville Road and State Highway 44 from industrial to residential. Plan Commission recommends approval. And these items will appear on the November 28th agenda, correct, for a vote?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Next, Councilman Allison Osby.
Thank you, Mayor. It's just a question. When it comes to the public hearings and the readings, do we as the council have the opportunity to discuss it at any point during this time, or do we have to wait until it comes back 2 weeks from now?
Ordinances typically have 2 readings, but there's no requirement or prohibition for council to discuss it. Sometimes council does.
We've done both.
Most times they don't, but that doesn't, there's nothing prohibited about anybody raising any question about it at this time.
Is the council supportive of?
Yes, because I have serious questions about this.
Okay, okay.
Press your button or you can't talk.
Oh.
And you'll have to go to the back of the room.
Thank you, Mayor. This was something that had come up, and I did talk to City Manager Roloff a little bit earlier today. So I just kind of wanted to get it out there from my perspective. So I had seen this on Plan Commission's agenda a while back, I think approximately 2 months ago, and I had watched the Plan Commission meeting in which there was a lot of questions raised, very, very good ones. And then also, I believe the developer was there that day as well to speak. So a compliment to the developer, one of the things that they had stated, which certainly addresses a need, I think, in this community, is they had talked about locating these apartments near, you know, where companies worked, and traditionally sometimes it's hard to get folks out that way that may have transportation issues in order to have those jobs. So in theory, I do think that that's a great idea. I do think it's a need in the community. But one of the questions that I had or will have is, you know, I see where that would be helpful if it's a month-to-month rental type situation, because typically a lot of times that those industries have high turnover. So if, you know, if those that sign leases are committed to 1 year, I'm not real sure, because if their job changes and they're no longer in that industrial area, well, then they're in the same position they were prior. The other thing is it's near a railroad, it's near the transload station, and from my understanding with the companies that were around there, they were not necessarily in favor of it, and I don't know that the residents are in favor of it as well. And there was quite a bit of discussion, and I did not capture on the last notes that we got to see, you know, what the actual vote was. It says, you know, it does recommend approval, but was it unanimous? Was it split? And so that's maybe something that Mayor Cummings could help me with if he remembers. Otherwise, I'll go back in my notes. But as of right now, unless there's something extremely compelling, I don't know that this will be something that I will support when it comes to a vote.
Deputy Mayor Herman.
Thank you. And I guess I'll echo some of the sentiments of my fellow council member. I'm concerned too, because apparently the railroad doesn't seem too keen on having an apartment complex next to their transload station. we moved out there because of residential problems. I'm a little concerned about Mr. Davis's comments that complaints usually come from single-family housing versus multifamily housing. When there's noise complaints, I treat these people as their apartment is their home. So I kind of look at that as a negative comment. And I just don't think it's fit. If it was on the south side of 44, where we already have apartment complexes and things, that's fine. But in looking at this, even though we may have more commercial land than we need at this point, we don't know what's going to happen. We just approved a sale, I think, because of the transload station going in. And we talked about how this could really generate and do improvements, so why would we want to put apartments on top of a commercial area? I just don't see that. I mean, I know the numbers don't say it, but we just approved a whole bunch of apartment complexes in the last year and a half. I can't believe there's that much need for apartments in the Oshkosh area. And, you know, I'd like to see more development in single-family housing and continue in that direction than more apartments. I mean, we have the big one going in on Oregon and Ripple. We just had a big one go in out by 76 and Y. I think they're moving forward on the one on Olson Acres, which will have multi-use there. I just don't think this is a good fit, good location. I understand why you want to make it commercial so you have more options, kind of like our downtown study, all the options, but I don't think this is a good location for an apartment complex, and I won't support it either. Thank you.
All right, we will move on. If there's no other council statements, this will be voted on at the 28th meeting, November 28th meeting. Now we move to citizen statements to council. Citizens are to address the council only. Statements are limited to 5 minutes. Must address items that are not listed on the council meeting agenda, are limited to issues that have an impact on the city of Oshkosh, and the common council may address at a future meeting, and must not include endorsements of any candidates or other electioneering. Pam, did anyone sign up to speak at this?
Yes, we have Art Rathjen, 2380 Highway 44.
Good evening. My comment is related to an invitation that on behalf of the president of Greater Oshkosh, Jason White, and the board of directors, we'd formally like to invite the council and members of the city staff to a report to the community on Monday, November 27th at the new arena. I know that there are a number of concerns about possibly getting everybody together at times of whether or not that offers a quorum, but as your Economic Development Corporation here for the city, this is a chance for us to, with our board, report on the success of what's happened during the past year, as well as outline objectives and plans for the new coming year in 2018, and we'd ask that if you're available, you're cordially invited. This is the first public event that will be hosted in the arena, and we're delighted that the folks there have made this space available. Hope you can join us. Any questions?
Thank you. We will have to notice it, correct?
Right. Yes, I will notice it.
Thank you.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Richard Holbert, 808 Washington Avenue.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak here. Everybody should have a copy of the paper that I have. It's just to bring up to your attention about a zoning issue that I would like for you to reconsider. Sometimes when cities make plans, smaller people fall through the cracks and all the issues aren't covered, and I just wanted to bring it to your attention, and hopefully you can give me an answer at a later date. So on July 11, 2000, I entered into a contract to purchase a duplex, and I put a supporting document, Schedule A form, from American Title with the paperwork here. At no time did I ever request for my property to be zoned as single family. Also, at the time of purchase, there was no ordinances to pay for inspection on duplex or R2 zoning properties. Here's the issue. I have the property for sale with a potential buyer who was interested in the property as a duplex. After their research, he or she informed my realtor the city has this address as a single family now. I hired Hirschberg Law, and I listed their address and their contact numbers. And they informed me, after talking with you, that the city of Oshkosh, all I had to do was to send in past electric bills over the past years, that I've always kept it separate. I did this, and then I was informed by the city I had to pay a $45 fee for an inspection. This is my issue. I would not have bought the duplex back in 2000 if under those conditions. And that is not part of the original contract when I purchased it. I respectfully request the city to honor the original contract with no inspections and keep the R2 zoning and the duplex status as when I purchased the property. To do otherwise will cost a significant amount of money to convert the property to a single-family home, changing the 2 front doors, furnaces, and electrical. It would also be a breach of the original contract when I purchased it. Future plans over the years when I bought it, and the expenditures were based on the original terms, not the current imposed terms. Please send your decisions to Hirschberg after you consider this. Appreciate your time and your consideration on this matter. And on a personal note, with the veterans past weekend, I'd like to share one of my favorite memories when I served in the Navy. Every Easter, we would have sunrise service aboard ship, and that ship would be in different parts of the Atlantic Ocean, and that sun would rise, and it would be total peace. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah, Mr. Hulbert, I'd suggest you talk to Darren Birch, our planning manager. He's not aware of this issue, and we can certainly help you. Let's get to the bottom of it, but I don't know if it necessarily requires any council action. It may require, but I don't know if it even does. So we might be able to help you, Mr. Hulbert.
Jennifer Considine, 300 Dale Avenue. I have no further individuals registered.
Okay, thank you. Now we move to consent agenda items, those items of a routine administrative nature that are voted on by the council in a single roll call vote. Staff recommends approval of all items. Any member of the public or common council may request that an item be removed from the consent agenda for discussion. And Pam, did we have anyone sign up to speak to any of the items on the consent agenda?
I have no one.
Right, therefore, I'll bring it back to the council for a motion and a second and discussion.
So moved.
Second.
Deputy Mayor Herman.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know, Mr. Robbie's the one that answers, or even if the city manager can. It's reference Resolution 17-543, the Aviation Industrial Park. I know the work is done, and we have to, modify the contract. I guess my comment is we should not do any more work in that Aviation Industrial Park until the county holds up their end of the deal. We spent millions and millions of dollars getting it ready, and it's ready for land sale as soon as the runway gets put in. And I don't think the taxpayers of Oshkosh should be paying any more money for the Aviation Industrial Park till the county holds their end of the bargain up.
I can follow up on that piece in that we're doing this so we can close out the EDA grant by the end of the year because
Right,
that's
okay.
important. So this is the last piece
So
that
we're
needs to be done to
basically
close
done-
that project out.
We're done with our end of the park.
Of the EDA-funded project, yes. And
Okay.
I think there's a water main connection that might be coming through at a future date.
It's a separate project that's already under construction, is the
Okay.
water main loop to not only provide increased level of service to aviation, but also other existing development along Oregon and the Ripple area.
Yeah, and I understand it's TIF improvements and things. I just I guess I'm to the point where I think we've spent enough money for now, and we should wait for the county to uphold their end of the bargain before we do any more.
Yeah, this was just some final quantity
Right,
closeouts.
just a comment. Thank you.
Councilmember Palmieri.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Mr. Davis, would you mind on Resolution 17538 on the specific implementation plan amendment for the arena, just for the public benefit, describe some of the reasoning behind the significant increase in the signage allowances, those base standard modifications. Looks like we have the west facade going up to 1,580 square feet. Video message board, let's see here, wall signage. I'm looking at page 123 in our packet, which is not numbered in the document, sorry.
I know where you're talking about.
Okay.
Yes. This was based on the applicant's submission here back in the past month regarding their final design plans, and I think it took them a while to figure out exactly how the signage was going to work. Now that they changed the facade to kind of improve the facade appearance from the street, so they incorporated the new signage into that. And they do have multiple anticipated uses for the video boards that far exceed anything the city's ever envisioned, and this is kind of a unique property, and I think that resonated with the Plan Commission in that this is a very unique venue that justifies this type of increase in the signage and the video display. As you can see, we did include also the restrictions on the video on 5 and 6, that there'd be no messages more than once every 10 seconds, no flashes, no scrolls, and nothing that would interfere with traffic that would confuse people when it comes to traffic safety.
So, but there were some folks on the Plan Commission that expressed, and staff, I'm sorry, that expressed some concerns about traffic, and so these specific items in there help mitigate those concerns, correct?
That's what the intent is, yes, so that if the transportation director and community development staff determined that we have created a situation that interferes or misleads or confuses the drivers, that we could modify this approval, so it eliminates that confusion.
So just for the public benefit then, that 1,580 square feet is not one great big sign, it's a combination of several, the logo with the herd and the video screen, is that correct?
The video screen, I believe, is the 308, and I might have to be corrected on that one. I don't remember the math off the top of my head. The 1,580 is a total for the whole wall facade. That is one of the bigger wall facades we'd ever have in the city at this point in time.
Thank you.
Councilmember Pansky.
Thank you, Mayor. My concern is with Resolution 17-545, strongly encouraging the CN Railroad to cooperate with the city. The one thing that I don't see in here is a time frame, and I'm wondering if that's necessary to put that in there. I know it says that the city clerk is going to forward this to the CN Railroad U.S. offices, as well to Senator Ron Johnson and Congressman Glenn Grothman. However, we lack the time frame as to any sort of response, or when, how this is going to implicate us and hinder any of our progress. I'm just wondering if we need to address that at all.
It's pretty tough to address a specific time. I mean, we could request a time frame and say, respond to us within a week. They may or may not. And there's not really a consequence to not responding to it. We're continuing to work with the railroad. We have also engaged outside counsel and are evaluating our options at this point.
So then maybe just for staff, will you just be putting this back on the agenda if we get a response from CN or
I think
our
we're gonna
representatives?
keep you updated on this, because this is going to be an ongoing concern that we have.
Right.
Yeah.
That was my concern, hence the timeframe
This will be helpful,
question, but-
because my answer to your question would have been, I would have preferred to have yesterday in there.
Right, of course, or not have this issue at all.
Yeah, yeah,
but-
we wouldn't be doing it all
Okay.
exactly.
Okay, thank you. Oh, nope, never mind.
Councilmember Ellison Osby.
Thank you, Mayor. It's actually just to, I guess, as Ms. Pansky had pointed out, in regards to 17545, this isn't our first rodeo with the railroad. And in my time on council, in over 6.5 years, we've never had an easy, quick situation. So I think it's one of those that I know my experience in the past is typically when anything has come in, staff usually responds like immediately, and then we're on a waiting game until we get a response, and then we always immediately respond. So unfortunately, they're kind of on up north cabin time when it comes to responding.
And I would say that both Senator Johnson's and Senator Grothman, or Congressman Grothman's office have both been responsive. They're like, what can we do? What, you know, so they really want to help with this as well. But
I agree.
I think we're trying every vehicle we
We
can.
may
and
need
I
to give
think
an additional shove besides.
this is an additional one as well.
And I did mention this to Senator Johnson Saturday at the Honor Wall dedication on Oshkosh West, so he's very aware of this situation, what it's doing to the city.
It's, you know, if you want to turn it, you know, make lemons out of lemonade, it's an exercise in patience.
Okay.
Nice try.
I tried.
I see no other councilman that wishes to question anything on the consent agenda, so would you please take the roll?
Rousey?
Aye.
Palmieri?
Aye.
Allison Osby?
Aye.
Herman?
Aye.
Pansky?
Aye.
Cummings?
Aye.
Carried 6.
There were no items removed from the consent agenda, so we'll go to pending ordinances. The first is ordinance 17-550, modify parking regulations on Leeward Court West, north of Westfield Street and West 6th Avenue. Pam, did anyone register to speak to this?
I have no one.
All right, bring it back to the council for a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Please take the roll.
Rousey?
Aye.
Palmieri?
Aye.
Allison Osby?
Aye.
Herman?
Aye.
Pansky?
Aye.
Cummings?
Aye.
Carried 6.
Next is ordinance 17-551, cancel December 26, 2017 council meeting. Gee, Pam, did anyone sign up to speak to this?
No one is registered.
Bring it back to the council for a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Would you please take the roll?
Rousey?
Aye.
Palmieri?
Aye.
Allison Osby?
Aye.
Herman?
Aye.
Pansky?
Aye.
Cummings?
Aye.
Carried 6.
We have 3 new ordinances coming up, and there'll be no formal action taken on them at this meeting. The first is ordinance 17-552, amend Chapter 16 Housing Code of the Municipal Code to create Section 16-33, paren A, close paren 10, close paren pertaining to carbon monoxide detectors, and Section 16-46, paren B, close paren pertaining to carbon monoxide detectors, penalties. Pam, anyone?
I have no one.
Ordinance 17-553, repeal and recreate portions of Chapter 13 Fire Prevention to adopt and updated provisions of the International Fire Code, parens IFC, close parens, and pertaining to the forfeiture for smoke detector violation. Again, Pam, anyone sign up?
I have no one registered to speak.
City
Mr.
Manager
Mayor,
Law?
City Attorney Lawrenson had provided you a memo with some revisions to that ordinance
Oh, yes,
that
sir.
closely reflects what the Rental Housing Advisory Committee had recommended.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have ordinance 17-554, approve zone change from I institutional district to IPD institutional district with planned development overlay, 425 Lakeshore Drive, water filtration plant. Plan Commission recommends approval. And is anyone from the public?
I have no one.
Councilperson Pansky?
Maybe Alan or maybe Darren. There are a few conditions in here, specifically condition item number 4, for allowance of a barbed wire fence. Yet later on in the Plan Commission minutes, it states that Steve Brand said that there is no barbed wire proposed for this. So I'm wondering if that needs to be removed prior to this approval next meeting.
It does. We'll look into it, because when we had the discussion at the meeting, in our plan set, we had some barbed wire in the plan set that we had for review during the discussion. It was stated that there was no barbed wire being proposed, so we'll have it removed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to new resolutions. Resolution 17-555, approve Image Oshkosh, a master plan for our center, city, and central investment strategy. Plan Commission recommends approval. Okay, anyone sign up to speak?
I have no one.
I'll bring it back to the council for a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Councilperson Pansky?
Thank you, Mayor. Probably Darren again. I just want to make sure that this gets out in the open under fiscal impact. It says that there is no fiscal impact of the plan itself, but I would assume that we hired them to do this work.
Yeah,
Do we know how much that was?
I think the contract was, the plan itself to get here to the contract was about $150,000 contract.
Okay,
believe.
I couldn't, I tried to look back and I couldn't find that, because I think it was like 2 years ago
Correct.
that we did that. My second question is, now that it's implemented, how do we go back, well, soon to be implemented, I would assume, how do we go back and kind of check off those items that we've already accomplished? For example, we've established the Arts and Beautification Committee here in the city of Oshkosh, and that was one of your recommendations. How do we just simply move ahead with this and kind of just check it off on the side and move on? Or do we have to kind of reevaluate some of those things now that we're at this point?
No, there's actually some specific we have the Public Arts and Beautification. The Public Arts and Beautification is going to help us with some of the implementation of the plan itself. So that you see some recommendations in here specifically about what we can do to engage or create public art opportunities downtown. The Public Arts and Beautification community is going to help us implement those sections of the code, or those sections of the plan.
Well, that was just one example. I know, by going through the plan, you can kind of see where we're already
Sure.
headed in the right direction, but
In
we don't
some
have to go
areas.
back and reestablish that in the plan that we've already accomplished those things. No.
No, and I think the other thing is, now we start the implementation, and I think, as I was looking through some of all the recommendations, it's staggering the amount of work that we have ahead of us, and what we're going to need to have some type of team that we build up to just implement the plan. We had something similar back in the early 2000s for some downtown projects. I think we have to do that again, because when Councilman Palmieri talked about the partnerships, there's going to be a lot of partnerships that we're going to need to engage to get this plan implemented. So I think some type of committee that we're going to create to implement the plan, and then there'll be some type of implementation report that we'll try and get done on a yearly basis.
And
So
then
you know where we
what's
are.
the time frame that we are going to revisit this? Are you looking to come back to this on a yearly basis and to see where we are as far as accomplishing some of these implementations, or are you thinking
ongoing.
5-year? Okay.
It's going to be ongoing each year. Even this year, as part of our budget process, we've been looking at, what items can we pick off in the plan that we might need some budget help on. We're already looking at, areas where do we need to create a new zoning district to implement? Do we need to change some of our design guidelines? So we're already in the process of looking at those changes, and as we move forward with that, we're going to bring it back, and you'll know the reason we're doing that is because of this plan.
Okay, then my final question, I don't know if you're aware, but Go Transit is going through the transit development plan right now, and you guys looked at accessibility in this specific area. Is this a document that they can now use to kind of balance what we have and what they need to work on? Do you share this document with like East Central and?
We share it with everybody.
Okay,
It's on
okay.
our websites.
Okay, great, thank you.
City Manager Roloff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The other thing I was going to mention is that as we work on our 2019 to 2020 strategic plan next summer, this will be so primary to our discussion. And I think 2-year goals, we'll be looking at a lot of 2-year goals. A lot of it will be the introductory work, because there'll be some zoning changes and some plan amendments, comprehensive plan amendments that'll need to be done. But that's usually the start to this. And then we also look for opportunities. Some things, 2 years ago, the arena wasn't even on the radar screen, and suddenly we're a couple weeks away from opening. So those are the other things, but we have to lay the groundwork, and I think the groundwork had started with updates of the comprehensive plan and doing those necessary foundational changes to get things going.
In-house.
Yeah, in-house, yeah. You hear that, Dave?
Oh. Councilmember Palmieri.
Yes, Mr. Davis, was it in the scope of, was it in the scope of the contract with Halsey Levine to identify any funding for the implementation of this? I'm not seeing that in the implementation component.
Just in general terms, when it comes to CIPs or tax increment financing or grant programs or any partnerships with investors, that's basically going to be a case-by-case basis, because every one of them have to match either the funder's objectives or state law when it comes to what we can spend our money on. So that is part of the art of putting a plan in, implementing a plan, is finding the funding for that. And I couldn't say there's going to be an easy menu or cookbook for any particular site.
So it was part of the scope of the contract to identify some forms of funding?
Some forms of funding, but it's not going to be site-specific.
Okay.
Mr. Davis, you pushed the button.
Oh, yes, I did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did want to chime in when Councilmember Pansky asked about the funding. I wanted to remind the council that WEDC gave us a $50,000 grant as part of the 150, and the Community Foundation and the Chamber also paid for the paid for part of that. And I want to say we got outside funds for about half the costs of this project. So I wanted to give some credit to WEDC, the Chamber, and the Community Foundation for funding this starting 2 years ago. And I don't want to leave anybody out. Did
that include the outside the scope of this, the corridor studies? Did they also help fund those?
I believe the Community Foundation helped with that, but WEDC and the Chamber did not.
Okay.
Deputy Mayor Herman.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, on just looking at a little bit, probably the South Shore East, looking at some of the uses. Over the years when we've approved plans like this, and first I want to say it's a great document, well done. We kind of get backed in corners sometimes saying that this is what we want in that area and we'll sit tight till we get that in this area. How flexible are we? I mean, if we get a shovel-ready project, can that alter the plans and then adjust the plans based on that? Because this is a working document, correct?
Yes, and there is a two-step process for something like that, because we would have to amend our plan.
You know, in a very vanilla letter you sent to council on Friday in our packet, you identified some potentials with no real substance. And so I just kind of, where are we at? Do we have some stuff ready to go? Are we moving forward? Or are we just hoping that these things fit into that district?
I'd make an analogy into the, earlier the city established an aviation industrial park and sold some of the land to non-aviation related businesses. I don't want to replicate that type of thing, so I would suggest the city, if this is what we want to implement, then this is what we want to hold out for, because we're holding it out for a very high level of development with high employment impact, high economic impact, high property value impact. So I hate to say give us the short-term result to forego our long-term goals for the plan.
Okay. And that being said, are we eventually looking at putting together almost like an RFP to send out to, or for GOEDC, the Chamber, for all those people that bring in businesses and entities into the city? Are we going to put together a kind of a package, and then maybe even an incentive package, so that we're not sitting here 10, 15, 20 years and now we've got nothing and now we start, oh, we got to do something?
Yes, and we will be working with the RDA because we typically use the RDA for creating the RFPs and sending those out. And when it comes to incentive packages, that always comes back to council to determine what kind of incentive
Yeah.
package there would be.
But even with that RFP, are you looking at council weighing in on kind of what we're thinking and what we want to see it tied into this plan? Because I know I went to a couple of their events, and they were very well attended, but, you know, things change. And now, like Mr. Roloff said, you know, the arena wasn't on our radar 2 years ago. Now it is. You know, Oshkosh Corp building the corporate offices on the golf course wasn't in our plans. Now it is. So I think we got to stay very flexible, and I just think that as councils change a little bit and ideas change and as a few things happen in that district, I want to stay as flexible as possible, but still get to our goals, which is really what's here in desired land uses, because that's what I think this is a great area for, entertainment, hotels, banks, et cetera, so, and public space. So it's a good plan. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Just a couple of comments. I was involved in a lot of the meetings, and I think we're finally realizing what we've talked about over and over at Plan Commission and so forth, that we do have higher standards, and we're going to stick to our guns in these standards. We're not going to, you know, jump the first time somebody says, I'm going to do this here. Well, if it doesn't fit in the plan, and if it doesn't meet the criteria and the standards, I think we would be remiss in just letting things pass. I think the city has been guilty of that in the past. You just look what has. You look at the frontage roads and other things, and it's pretty piecemeal. There's no vision. It's just build it. And I don't think we need any more box stores. I think we need to, we want to preserve the character and the history of the central city, but that doesn't mean if someone comes with just a dynamite architectural plan for a building that's using the materials we have specified, that we're not going to look very closely at accepting that plan. So I think the big thing is we've got very high standards now. And I think any council would be remiss in backing off from those standards. I see no more lights. Therefore, would you please take the roll?
Krause.
Aye.
Palmieri.
Aye.
Allison Osby.
Aye.
Furman.
Aye.
Pansky.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Carried 6.
Next is Resolution 17-556, approved 2018 Business Improvement District Operating Plan and Budget. Is there anyone here?
I have no one registered.
Bring it back to the council for a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. Would you please take the roll?
Krause.
Aye.
Palmieri.
Aye.
Allison Osby.
Aye.
Furman.
Aye.
Pansky.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Carried 6.
Next is Resolution 17-557, approve engineering services agreement with AECom Technical Services, Inc. for construction monitoring and documentation services related to construction of contract number 17-03, Mary Jewel Lift Station and Park Shelter, $589,665. Pam, is there anyone?
I have no one registered.
Bring it back to the council for a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. Deputy Mayor Herman?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Robbie, can you, we're spending almost $600,000 for technical services and construction monitoring. What's that, what does that count for? Because so far I've counted about $3 million in change orders using AECom. So I'm not a big fan of AECom anymore, so. Can you explain what $600,000 is going to get us this time?
What this does is it provides full-time on-site construction observation, review of all the contractor submittals and shop drawings, and functioning as that first point of contact for the contractor and the interpretation of the contract documents, and really being the contract manager, construction manager, and on-site inspection for this project.
When we do street projects, don't our city engineers are out there already, right? Why aren't,
Yes,
don't we have a stormwater engineer that could be doing the same thing?
This is a sanitary lift station, so we wouldn't use stormwater personnel for it, but we do not have anybody capable of doing that type of building inspection and review of HVAC, mechanicals, plumbing and all the sorts of other things that go into a facility like this. Street projects, yes, we have great staff for managing those projects, but a complicated pump station building structure like this, we do not have that expertise in-house.
Okay, thank you.
Councilperson Palmieri.
Yes, Mr. Abbey, I also have concerns about the inflated price tag on this supervision. In your recommendations, or I'm sorry, in Mr. Roloff's recommendations, there's a reference to Chapter 12 of the code that professional services of a specialized nature, including engineering services, may be procured without the use of formal and sealed quotes. And I guess I would agree with Deputy Mayor Herman that, you know, perhaps this needs a second look. And, you know, if council is willing to discuss it, potentially looking at having this bid out. Mr. Roloff, perhaps you want to respond to that.
This project was designed by AECom, and typically when you use an engineering firm, you maintain that consistency. And staff does take a look at the cost. I know this seems like a lot of money, and it is, but in terms of what we would expect a project of this nature, this represents within the range of what we would expect for construction monitoring for a project of this nature. It's their design, so they know it better than anyone. If there's an issue that the contractor has, this engineer will be able to address those issues. James, I'm not sure what else you'd have to add to that, but that's not uncommon for this to be done. If we were looking at the original design, that would be a different thing, but then you would still typically give the construction monitoring and documentation unless there was a reason that you felt that it wasn't appropriate to do that. Maybe you weren't satisfied with the job they did, there was some issue that came up, or if the cost was out of line. But for the $3 million plus that we're looking at for a lift station of this nature, less than $600,000, that's generally within the range because there's a lot of environmental work that goes into these types of contracts. James, I'm not sure if you
I think the biggest thing, you know, as you mentioned, you know, sticking with the same engineering consulting firm for doing construction management and observation as you used for design, you know, that is, you know, a very important aspect because there are a lot of things that the contractor may ask of, well, why is this like this? And as the, you know, people who were involved in the design from the start, they can answer right away. They don't have to say, well, you know, let me go back and talk to the design engineer. I'll get back to you in a week or two when we finally figure it all out. They know right away and they can answer right away, and it speeds up the process and keeps the contractor moving. Because if there are those kinds of delays, you know, we're going to be paying a lot more than this in contractor delay fees in change orders on the project versus keeping that same consultant on board and moving forward.
Then why wouldn't?
Councilperson Pansky.
Mr. Robbie, you had stated that this is a full-time person that will be on site. So when they come up with this, because there's really no information about the breakdown of what is costing us what, I mean, I had a little bit of sticker shock with this amount as well when I got this. How is that monitored? How is that broke down by when he's there and what he's doing? And I mean, is it an hourly rate? How?
Yes, everything is an hourly rate based on the time that they are out there. And if the contractor is not doing work that they need to be out there, that person's not out there.
And how do we monitor that?
We have staff that are, you know, regularly involved. We go to all the weekly progress meetings. We maintain regular communication with their project managers to find out, okay, you know, what's in the look ahead, what work is going on. Okay, yeah, we see there's some work going on. You know, does this person or that person really need to be out there at full time? So we have staff that are involved in the background in kind of that coordination and communication with their project management team.
So kind of along the lines of Deputy Mayor Herman's comments, we see a lot of amendments from AECom. So are we looking at it, let's say that he's not out there quite as much. I mean, does he get an amendment then later on that we don't have to pay him that much? Or if he's there overtime, are we paying him time and a half? I mean, how do we keep an eye on this full-time person that is not a city employee yet we're contracting with?
Well, generally, you know, If their costs are lower than this, you wouldn't see that. Any negative construction change or any negative engineering services agreement, those don't come back to you. Those are just automatically approved per the municipal code. So, there are, I would say less than half of contract change orders that actually are executed require coming back to council because there are that many negative contract change orders or engineering services amendments that we just process because that's what the code states we should do.
Now, we didn't put anything like this out for bid, so when you get this information, is there a breakdown of what this full-time employee will be, what the monitoring is going to be, and what documentation services? Like, is there a breakdown of,
yes, there's a
to
very
get to this figure?
Yes, there's a very
Why did we
specific
not
breakdown.
get that information?
We've typically not provided that.
In this amount, I think we should be looking at that.
We can certainly add that to the agenda, we'd be happy to do that. There's, typically what you'll get is you'll get a scope of work. It identifies the scope of work, it identifies the
The
number of hours.
information that we have here is just very
Yes, that's typically what we've done.
non-specific.
We can provide that to council.
And when there's this amount of money on the table, I think we should be looking at these things.
I
That's
can
just my opinion.
assure you, staff is looking at those things, and if council would like that included in the agenda packet, we can certainly do that.
It's just very hard for me to support this. I'm still kind of undecided at this point in the evening, but not very happy with it. But thank you.
Councilmember Palmieri.
Yes, I'd just like to agree with Councilwoman Pansky that the scope document would be appreciated, I guess, going forward with something with this kind of ticket. And it seems that if we, as a practice, do the monitoring or contract with the same company that did the design for the monitoring, then perhaps the initial bid or contract should include all of that at once rather than bringing it back if there's really no other alternative presented.
The challenge with that is until the design is complete, you don't really have a good way of estimating how much effort's going to be required for the construction monitoring services. You really got to get the design done to be able to look at it and say, okay, a contractor's probably going to take about this amount of time to build this project, so we need these people involved at this time with these hours. You can't make a good determination on construction management until the design is actually complete and the project is out for bids, unfortunately.
That would likely result in more
Excuse me,
change orders.
If I could just follow up then. So is 20% of the cost of the project a standard in this industry for that type of management?
On a complicated project like this, it's not unusual.
Thank you.
Councilman Kraus.
Is this typical practice in these kind of things? It just seems like it's an add-on, that they're just conning us out of money to do their job in the first place?
They're certainly not conning us out of anything. The design, as I said, the design needs to be done in order to estimate the construction services needs. And oftentimes, we're looking at, okay, how much effort's really needed. And then, oftentimes when they come back with a proposal, we review it as staff and say, you know what, we think you've overestimated in these areas and you need to make some cutbacks on these things. So we do go through them very carefully before we would even recommend bringing them to you.
So this was their original amount, or did you talk them down? Did you negotiate it at all?
I'm trying to remember, we did go back and forth with them and we did change a few things, but not a substantial amount with this one.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ellison Osby.
Thank you, Mayor. In regards to this resolution, because of the points that you brought up, Mr. Robbie, I do agree that because they did the original design work, I think to have somebody else, we will definitely likely incur additional costs, although I'm not excited about this cost, but it does make sense to be consistent and to carry it through. But I think from council, and not just this evening, but I think multiple evenings, probably within this I think within the last 12 to 18 months, we've had a number of concerns regarding AECom. And so, what I guess I would like to see, because we're going to be coming upon our capital improvement, projects, with the budget. And there's gonna be additional things that I'm sure is gonna require this type of work. So like we do for geo borrowing, when we've had Ellers or Ehlers do it, typically we'll see, you know, when they've bid it out, what are 3-4 companies that have responded. And I think council's probably maybe to the point that maybe that's something that we want to see starting January 1st, 2018. Because this is a lot of money. We have had a lot of concerns, and I think we owe it to the constituents to make sure that we're still choosing the right company. And I know an argument in response to that is that they have done the work for a very long time and that they know the history of Oshkosh, but I'm not convinced at this point that that's an argument that should, I guess, keep us, you know, stagnant, and it seems like that they're the only ones that we're working with.
One comment in addition to that is I think we should also be notified when things come in under budget. We see the things that go over. I think things do come in under, and we should be notified when things come in under. And the other question I have is, you're following procedures that are either prescribed by state statute or accepted, I'll say, industry practices, correct?
How do you mean?
Well, the way we go about working with an AECom or how we bid things out, we have construction management. These are accepted industry practices or standards, plus we're following whatever state statute might exist.
Yeah, as far as the scope of work and what we're asking them to do, yes, it's, you know, accepted practices. And as far as, you know, the selection, you know, I think it's, you know, the municipal code and, you know, whatever requirements there are for in the statutes as well.
In fact, when you're dealing with engineering or professional services, you're actually encouraged not to look at price alone, because price alone is not the factor when you're dealing with professional services. Think of a doctor. You know, you wouldn't say, well, let's get the lowest bid on a doctor. Similarly, you don't go for the lowest bid, you go for the most qualified firm. With that said, you know, I've been hearing the concerns that council has had on this issue. For example, assuming that we get the Oshkosh Corporation, thank you, Oshkosh Corporation does decide, we will be seeking proposals for the design and for all that, because there's really, the Lakeshore Golf Course is essentially a blank slate. There's no one bit of advantage that one firm has. If somebody has more knowledge about a project, you want to use them because they have more knowledge about that. That'll make it more efficient for us. In this case, nobody necessarily has a clear advantage, and so it behooves us to seek proposals for that. And I've instructed James and his staff that we would be doing something like that. You know, AECOM's not the only one, the only firm that we use for this. Our purchasing ordinance requires that we provide council with an annual report. You'll get the report for 2017 once Ms. Larson has collected all that information. We do have several firms that are specialized for certain things. We use a certain engineering firm for our water filtration plant, another one for our sewage treatment plant. Those are not AECOM. It just depends on what the nature of the work is. But we have one for stormwater as well, Brown and Caldwell. You don't necessarily see those ones, but they're specialized engineering firms. We seek those people out, and so you'll see more of those coming up as we go on. And I've heard council wanting to see the document, and we'll provide the proposals, and you'll see the number of hours that are being devoted to each individual activity that's being done, the type of person, whether it's a principal with the firm, a senior engineer, engineering technician, things like that. Pretty similar to what our own engineering division does when they do work internally.
Deputy Mayor Herman.
Thank you. Just a comment. I agree with Councilmember Pansky. It would be nice to just have that breakout like we do in a lot of our projects. And I agree that, you know, I think we should periodically, from year to year or every few years, bid these out, because it is a competitive nature. I'm not saying it's got to be the cheapest. By all means, we want to have the quality. But at the same time, I just have had some concerns the last few years of all the change orders, and they seem to be coming from one particular firm. And I get it. Mr. Robbie says it all the time. You don't know what's underneath there until you start digging. But then maybe we need to do a little more digging before we dig. to make sure we know what we're digging into. So, but I agree in this. I mean, I was gonna vote no, but I'll support it because of where we're at with the status of this, and that AECom was the original on the project, and we need to move forward, and I think they've already started, so we need to. But I think in the future, that information should be provided also. Thank you.
Pam, please take the roll.
Krause,
No.
Palmieri,
Aye.
Ellison Osby,
Aye.
Herman,
Aye.
Pansky,
No.
Cummings,
Aye.
carried 4-2.
Resolution 17-558, authorize the filing by Go Transit of 2018 FTA and WisDOT operating and capital assistance grants, as well as county transportation assistance. I see no one in the audience that,
I have no one registered.
I didn't think so. Bring it back to the council for a motion and a second.
So moved. Second.
Discussion? Would you please take the roll?
Krause,
Aye.
Palmieri,
Aye.
Allison Osby,
Aye.
Herman,
Aye.
Pansky,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
carried 6.
We have council discussion, direction to the city manager, and future agenda items. There is one thing on here, which is a budget workshop on November 15th at 5 p.m. Councilperson Allison Osby.
Thank you. As much as I would love to be here with all of you tomorrow, I will actually be out of state. So I just wanted to let you know.
Thank you. What are you bringing back for us? Again, a second chance for citizens to address council. Pam, do you have anyone?
I have no one.
All right, council member announcements and statements. I do want to add one thing and remind everyone that the annual holiday parade is this Thursday, starting at 6 p.m. on Main Street. I get to be one of the judges. I get to light the holiday tree at 6 o'clock. City manager announcements and statements. Mr. Roloff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In your agenda packet, there's an update on the arena, but all you got to do is drive by. It's making progress. December 1st is coming, and you saw that Go EDC is also holding an event there even before the first game. So things are moving well. I think the infrastructure is progressing, even though we have a little setback with the railroad. Things are going well. The weather's been a little cold, but I've seen covers out there and getting the concrete done. So we're pleased that the utilities and the street work immediately around the arena will get done, so we're happy with that.
And the Herd's 3-1 already.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Doing all right, yeah.
You're doing all right.
Just think how they'll do when they're home. And then Mr. Davis has provided you an update on the TIF policy changes. I know we have a lot of things going on, and we, depending on what happens with Oshkosh Corp., we may be working on an active TIF. Not sure, it may behoove us to wait until all that's done before we start making some final changes. I certainly will follow council's lead on how quickly you want to do this. You know, I'm not aware of any other TIFs necessarily coming down the pipe anytime soon, but we can probably address this perhaps right after the first of the year.
Yes, we could do that.
So you're going to bring it back for council vote then?
Yeah, we want to, because we want you to formalize this. We've got a
Right.
lot of direction,
Right.
really good direction.
No, I think it's good. I like it. And that's why I'm just saying, I think we should confirm it as a policy and go forward.
Absolutely. So we'll be bringing it back after the first of the year. And that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
All right, Deputy Mayor Herman has a motion to go into a closed session.
All right, thank you, Mayor. I move that following the adjournment of this meeting, the council may convene in the closed session to discuss bargaining options, strategies, and parameters related to the negotiation of collective bargaining agreements with local number 316 IAFF, Oshkosh Fire Department, Oshkosh Fire Department Chief Officers, Oshkosh Professional Police Officers Association, Oshkosh Police Supervisors Association, and ASME 796 Transit pursuant to Section 19.85, Parent 1, Parent E of the Wisconsin State statutes where competitive bargaining reasons require a closed session.
Like a second?
Second.
Would you please take the roll?
Krause,
Aye.
Palmieri,
Aye.
Allison Osby,
Aye.
Herman.
Aye.
Hansky.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Carried 6.
Before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I'd like to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
And with that, I'd like a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Adjourn. Let's meet in quarter.